What's good, team? Welcome to another Small James coding tutorial where today we're going to be learning vanilla web development with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to be doing this by building the ultimate CRUD app. This project has absolutely everything you'll need to dive into vanilla development. It's a beginner-friendly tutorial, so don't worry if it's unfamiliar to you. We'll be looking at adding custom fonts, styling the whole application, using different icon sets, making a fully responsive design. We've got lots of dynamic elements to the video, very interactive using JavaScript, using the document object model. You can see that we have functional button clicks. We can add a to-do, which is like and subscribe. We can add that to-do. We can add another one, which is... So without further ado, let's get into the code. So what we're going to do is start off in a terminal. I'm in a directory where I'm going to make a folder called to-do app. We're going to cd into to-do app, and in there we're going to open this folder up inside of our Visual Studio Code editor. And in here we're going to create a new file called index.html, type the exclamation key to get some boilerplate code, and this is going to be our HTML document. Now to run this in a web browser, I'm going to be using an extension called Live Server inside of Visual Studio Code. We can see it just here, so I'd recommend installing that, and what that will allow us to do is to right click and open this file with Live Server. So that's going to pull up a blank document for us. We can check that it's working by typing in James, and we can see that James does indeed come up in the corner over there. And so we are going to change the title to to-dos, and this is where all the magic is going to happen. So here we have our boilerplate HTML code, and what we're looking at is a whole lot of tags. So tags represent different types of information, and they also section information. So the head of the document just here is responsible for meta information that does not really come up visually on the page. And the other thing that we can add is a style tag, where these tags often have closing tags. The closing tag is denoted by the slash in front of the tag name. And the style tags is where we're going to add all of our CSS to style the content within the body of our document. Now the body of the document is essentially like a Word document, and that's what is going to get displayed onto our page. And this is all within a HTML document, which is hypertext markup language. So as I mentioned before, we're going to start off with a blank document. And the first thing to know is that our document comes with some default styling. So if we go back and add James in here, we can see that James is not hard up flush against this corner. And that's because a default HTML document has a couple of features that we're just going to reset to the default. The first one is box sizing border box. Now in here, this is inside of my style tag. And this asterisk means select every HTML element and apply this style to it. So this is the first one. The second one we're going to reset is margin. The margin is the spacing on the exterior of the element. So if a tag is like a container, for example, the margin is the spacing specified outside of the container. If you were packing a truck, it would be the space that you allocate between the boxes. And then the padding is also going to be set to a default of 0, where the padding is the space inside the box. So if the box contains some kind of precious goods, how much padding you add between the item inside the box and the border of the box. So after adding those settings, we can see that our document is now hard up flush against the end of the corner. And we essentially have the perfect blank slate to make our ultimate CRUD app. So the first thing we're going to do to our app is target an element and give it some styling. So once again, this is all done within the style tag, which is inside the head tag of the document, where the head holds the meta information. And there's a number of different ways that we can style elements in the body of the document, where the first one is selecting by the tag name itself. So selecting by the tag name, in this instance body, and then having these curly braces, means that any styling we apply within these curly braces will be applied to every body tag in our document. Typically, HTML documents only have one body tag because there's only one body of information that should be for each website. And so in here, what we're going to do is set the minimum height to 100% of the VH or view height. So that's this entire view height. What we're also going to do is give it a background color of hashtag. We're going to use a hex code 0F172A as such. So if I refresh that page, we can see that set the whole document to this darker color. We're also going to set the color to white. So the color is the color of the items inside. So if I type James, James is now white. And if these styles are a bit unfamiliar to you, I'd recommend you check out FreeCodeCamp's responsive web design course. It might give you a bit of an introduction before you jump into the projects, but equally, we're going to cover everything pretty slowly, so you should be good to tag along. So now we've kind of done a little bit of styling. The next thing we're going to do is section out some elements inside of the actual body of our document. The first tag we're going to look at is a header tag, and the header contains the header information of the document. So this is often a title, or if you were writing an essay, it would be the introduction. So it might say, the title of the document, who it's by, or whatever. In this case, we're going to open that up, and anything we put inside these two tags, so the opening and the closing tag, will be within the header element, and obviously both of these are within the body. So in here, we're going to have an H1 tag, and we're going to write to-dos, just like that. So that comes up on our page. We can see that it's extra large, and that's because the H1 is the first kind of text tag that we encounter. It stands for header 1. There's headers 1 through 6, where obviously they're in descending order of size. So we're going to have our ultimate header being an H1. And after this header, this is like the next section of the document, we're going to have what's known as the main. And the main is the main body of the document. So this is where a majority of our content will be placed. And you may have guessed already, the last section is going to be the footer, and that's where we're going to have any sub information that is pertinent to the page. So what we could do is in here is write main to identify the different sections, and likewise with footer. And we can see now that they just come up generically on the page in descending order in a vertical layout, just as you would in a traditional text document. So the next thing we're going to do inside of body is give body a display. So display tells body how the information should be placed on the page. And the most common way to display information is typically flex. Flexbox, flex containers, it's a very efficient and effective way of getting neat layouts on your page. The other common one is grid, but personally I think flex is easier and you still get, 100% functionality from it. The default direction for flex is a row. So it essentially says, okay, align all these containers in a row. So that's why we can see that the layout direction changed. However, we can manually set it by setting the flex direction to column. And now we're back to the layout that we had before, except we've gone away from the default display, which is a block display, to now a flex. So we get extra functionality. The next thing we're going to do is separate the different sections. So this will only separate the direct children. So the direct children is only going to be our header, our main, and our footer. This H1 child is not a direct child of the body, but it is a direct child of the header. However, because it's not a direct child of the body, it will be protected from this gap, and we're going to put in 24 pixels. We can see that just put in a 24 pixel gap between each of the elements. We can see that if I added some more text here, it would stay snug to the to-dos, so it's only the direct children that the style applies to, so this one, and this one. And then what we're going to do is now target our main. We're also going to give that a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 8 pixels. So very similar to this first one, we're just changing the flex style. However, now what we're going to do is give it an additional property of flex 1, and that's just going to say, okay, if the parent container, which is the body, has a display of flex, then prioritize me in terms of its children to take up as much space of the parent container as possible. So that just means that this main section, and we can actually inspect and have a look at it, this main is just taking up as much of the content as it's allowed. We can see there are the 3 children containers. This is the gap that we specified, and the main has pushed the footer to the bottom of the page. So that's a great way of getting the footer down to the bottom of the page and making it stay there, because that's where the footer should be. So the next thing that we're going to do is add some fonts to our document, and we're going to do that in Google Fonts. So if you just come over to Google Fonts, we can click on this link just here. And now we're brought to this page here where we can come in and select whatever fonts we want. So in this case, we are going to be using Bungee as the first one. So this is a nice bold header font. So if we just click on that font, then that will take us to this page. We can select the regular font style. That shows that it's added here. Then we can come back into the fonts, add the second one, which is going to be Noto Sans. obviously, and probably not the Japanese one. So we can select Noto Sans. That's going to show it up here. And what we're going to do is select a bunch of their thinner font styles. So we might just come up to about 500, maybe even 600. And now what we can do is view the selected families. And over here, you can see this link tag. We're going to copy this whole link tag. There's actually 3 of them. Copy the whole thing, come over to our document, and link tags go in the head tag, not the header, the head. Paste them in just there. And now what we can do is select the HTML as we have here. The HTML tag already exists right up here, so it's our entire document, and we can apply these font families. So we can say font family is equal to Noto Sans, and we can provide a backup of sans serif. So if we reload our page, we can see that that font style has changed. What we're also going to do is just up here, we're going to select all H1 tags and apply a font family of Bungee to them and a backup of sans serif in case that can't load. And so now you can see that we have these 2 fonts on our page. We have this cool header text that's only going to be applied to the H1. And then we have the main of the document with the secondary font style. So that's super cool. The other thing we're noticing is that our document is sitting very close to the edge. What we're going to do is insert a custom padding. We reset it up here. Now we're going to set it to a custom amount of 24 pixels. That's just going to bring the document in a little bit so that nothing sits too close to the edge. And for our flex, the next thing we're going to do is actually add a font awesome icon set. So we will see how that works in a second. And to add that, what we're going to need to do is look up the Font Awesome 6 CDN. The links for all this stuff will be in the description of the video down below, so be sure to check that out. We're going to select this link tag, so that's going to allow us to use these icon sets, and we're going to paste it directly underneath the other link tags that we already have. And that's going to allow us to come into Font Awesome Icons and use their icon set, which looks absolutely precious. We obviously want the free ones because we don't have a paid account. And now you can just copy the HTML tag and place it wherever you want. So we're going to have this plus in the top header container. We can see it shows up on our page now. And since we don't want it underneath, we actually want it on the opposite side over here. What we're going to do next is target the header. It's good to kind of keep your styles in the same order as they appear in the HTML section or the body of the document down below. So header before main, we're going to give this a display of flex. So the default flex is row, the direction. Now what we're going to do is say items center, align items center. And so that's going to align them vertically on the page. And then to get a horizontal justification, we're going to justify content space between. So that's going to push them to either end. It's going to say leave space between them, push them to either side. So now we have this cute little icon button over here. Now this brings us to the next thing, which is classes. Currently we've only been selecting items and styling them by the tag. You can also add a class attribute. If you add information inside of this greater than and less than sign, it's known as an attribute. An attribute has an associated value. So we've added the attribute class to this icon. We've given it the value of this. We can add another class name by adding a space and inserting that there. So we can just say plus icon. We can target up here. And now what we can do is we can select things and style them based on their class by using a period. So in this case, what I'm going to do is target the font size of the icon and make it 1.2 rem. We can see that boosted it up a little bit. Honestly, we could go a little bit higher. Let's say 1.5. Now we have a nice big icon, and anything with the class name plus icon will get that size. There is a hierarchy of styling. The class name will be more important than the main, and the next one that we'll get to is the ID. That takes ultimate power in terms of the styling. Anyway, so now we kind of have the head of the document. We have a little plus element. The next thing we're going to look at is a bit of dynamic hover icons with CSS. So just like we increased the size of the plus icon, what we can do is we can actually give it a hover state and say on hover, what we want to do is change the color of it, and we're going to give it the color of cyan. So now what happens is every time I hover over it, it gets the color of cyan. The other thing we're going to do is change the cursor style. So when we hover over top of it, we want the cursor to be a pointer. So that's the proper clicking thumb. So it shows that it's an interactive element. And the other thing we're going to do is come up to the top of this page Then the asterisk selector, if you recall, that targets absolutely everything. And we're going to give it a property of a transition duration. So a transition is any kind of transition that occurs on a page stylistically. We're going to set it equal to 300 milliseconds. So that means that the duration of that transition takes 300 milliseconds. And where the color change of this icon was instant on hover before, now it will change gradually over approximately 300 milliseconds. So it's just a much smoother experience. So that's our little plus icon. The next thing we're going to do is actually add a style to the body to make it so that the page is centered to approximately a prose width and that it doesn't just get infinitely wider. So the way we're going to do that is by setting a width element. So depending on the display, the width of the elements can vary. What I recommend doing is, if you're not sure what the width of an element currently is, using the Chrome developer tools and this little inspection, you can hover over an item and see what space it's occupying. For example, I can hover over the header and see that's the whole header width. I can see the footers down there. I can see the entire HTML document. I could open up the header and see that the H1 tag is only occupying that amount of space. And if you wanted to custom edit the space and make it something that it's not already, we can add the width parameter, and I'm going to set it to 800 pixels. So now we can't see it because the page is currently 800 pixels. But if I come wider, we can see that the body of the document is limited to that 800 pixels. Now, obviously that's not centered in our page, and obviously when I go too wide, it sends that plus off the edge. So what we want to do is set a maximum width. So the maximum width will override and make sure that the maximum width is never more than. We want to ensure that that is never more than the 100% of the view width, which is the entire view width. So we will stay at 800 pixels until we reach the limiting condition, in which case the page will resize, and this is responsive web design. So if we come down to a mobile device, this max width will never occupy more than 100% of the view width. The last thing we want to do is give this item a margin of 0 in auto. So the 0, the first entry is the vertical margin, and if you recall, that is the space on the exterior of the container. The other one is the horizontal margin, and so we're setting that to auto, and that is going to auto space it on either side. So the benefit of that is when we do reach the 800 pixel limit, it should space it in the center, which it's not, and that is okay. We can deal with that in a second. And the reason is because these styles actually need to be applied to the subsections. So what we're going to do here is target the header. We're also going to target the main, and we'll target the footer. So we can target all three elements using commas in between them, and we're just going to set these parameters on each of them. And we're actually going to keep it so that the body occupies the entire space. However, these subsections only reach the maximum widths and center themselves, or have the horizontal margin equivalently and automatically generated. So now we have this perfectly responsive page where we're actually just going to change this to be 100% of the parent element instead of 100% of the view width. And so what will happen is 100% means 100% of the parent element that it can possibly take, and so these three sections will never occupy more width than they're allowed, basically, up to a point of 800 pixels, at which point they will just occupy 800 pixels and center themselves on the page. So now we have the start of our to-do app. The next thing we're going to do is add some to-dos to the main section, and the way we're going to do this is with some JavaScript in our HTML document. We do that by adding a script tag and the corresponding closing tag at the bottom underneath the body of our document. What we can do now is come into the main section, and we're going to have one section in here. So a section is another space tag. Now you don't have to use these spacing tags. You could just use the most generic tag, which is a div, which stands for division for all of these. It's just more obvious and more presentable, more readable if you use them, as they're meant to be used. For example, there's only one main section of a document. The header is obviously the header. And sections are sections. And within the section, the first section here, we're going to give it an ID of enter to do. Now, the ID is another attribute that we're adding to this section tag, and the value is entered to do. It should be noted that IDs have to be unique. There can only be one tag or element on the page that has that ID. And this ID is going to just be to-dos, because this is going to display all of our to-dos. So what we could do is just come in here and add to do, make it clear what each of them is doing. So there we have add to do, and then we have to-dos. Inside of this section here, I'm going to add a form. Inside the form, I'm going to have an input, and this is going to have a type of text. We're going to give this an ID equal to text input. And so now that we have given that an ID of text input, and input is obviously just for inputting text. Normally they are within forms. We can see that we have this little text input here. We will need to style that. So we can come up into the top of our thing. And the way that we are going to select the input is by selecting the section using the ID. So to select the section and style the section, we use the hash or the pound key, followed by the ID. As I mentioned, this needs to be totally unique. So this is completely unique. We can open this up. What we can actually do is enter a space to enter a sub element. So we can say, okay, find enter to do and select every input within enter to do. So that will highlight or select this input and style it for us. So in here, what we're going to do is say background transparent. We'll give it an outline of none, a padding of 4 pixels and 8 pixels. Let's see what that's looking like. So we can see we've got rid of some stuff. We're going to have to change the color to white as we have here. I'll move this over to the side so we can see it and close that off. So we will also want to, inside of here, add a button. This button is going to say add, just like that. And so above this, we're going to once again select enter to do, except this time we're going to select the form. So the form is within the enter to do, so that will select this form. We're going to give this a display of flex. We're going to say align items center as that. So now we've got a flex column here. With the input, we're going to give this a flex of 1. So that tells it to take priority of all of the flex children. So of these 2 children, the input is going to take the majority of space, and the add will only get the space that it's allowed. We're actually going to change this to stretch so we can see that now they occupy the same height. We're going to give the input a border of 1 pixel solid sky blue. So now we have a pretty border. And that was actually a lie. We're instead going to put this inside of the form because the form contains both of them. And now we're going to select enter to do and style the button. And so for the button, what we're going to do is also give it a background of sky blue. So we're going to match the border color. So we can refresh that. We can see that it has a random border, so we're going to remove that. So we can say border none, outline none as such. So that's all good. We can see that the input still has a bit of a border, so we'll have to remove that. So we'll say border none there. So now that's all gone. For the button, we'll give it a padding of 0 vertically because the vertical padding is determined by this input here. And for horizontal padding, we might make it 8 pixels. So that will just push it out. We'll set the color of the text to navy. And what we'll also do is just set the font family to Bungee with a backup of sans serif. So now we just have a little add button. I might actually just make this the background color. So it's going to be 0F172A. So now that just goes to the background. We'll also want to give this a cursor pointer so that when we hover over it, it has that pointer arrow. And now what we can do is we can give it a hover. So we can say enter to do select the button within and target the hover state. So when we're hovering, we want to set the background to transparent. So what that looks like is it goes away. And we also want to set the text color to sky blue. So they will swap. So that's what our little add button looks like, which is quite neat. Now for the input, I'm going to come up here and massively blow up this padding. So that is going to be maybe 12 pixels. We could possibly do that all around. So now we have a much bigger enter to do, which is nice. And I might just add the padding X here. So it's consistent 12. Awesome. So now we can add a to do. What we'll do is also pass another attribute to this input. That is the placeholder attribute, and we'll say enter to do. So that will be there when there is nothing there. So it says enter to do. We can enter the to do as we like, and then shortly we'll have a button that will enter all of our to dos. So the next thing we're going to do is have this section here. We can now remove that text. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to render out a bunch of to-dos. However, for this section, we're actually going to do it with JavaScript. So what we can do in the script section down here is interact with JavaScript. And the way that you make documents dynamic, currently we just have a static form, so it's just static information. If we refresh it, it's just static. There's not a lot of interactivity because, as much as we can type text, it's not handled by any means. So we use the script tag to add interactivity with JavaScript. Now the way that we do that is by using JavaScript to manipulate the document object model. So that is the DOM, document object model, and it basically means that if we inspect, everything here is the document object model. So we can manipulate this using JavaScript and access it using the document in the script. So here I could say document.getElementById. That's going to target an element. I could pass in the ID. It would target this element, and then we can manipulate it using JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define an array. So const to-dos is equal to an array like this. I'm actually going to define it using let in case we have to vary it, and it is currently an empty array. Now on page load, what we're going to do is define a function called render to-dos, and how that is going to work is that is going to take every to-do on the to-do list and it's going to append it to this HTML section just here. So what we're going to do is we're going to target this HTML section. We're going to make it so that we can access it in our JavaScript, and the way that we do that is we say const to-dos list, this is where all of our to-dos will go, is equal to the document. We get the element by the ID. The ID is to-dos, it's a unique ID. And now what we can do is inside of render to-dos, we can go through our to-dos list and say for each, we can target this individual to-do. We could even get the index of that, take the index as an argument, open this up into a function. And now what we can do is we can append stuff to this section just here. So the way the section is going to work, the first thing we'll want to do is we'll style it. So we'll just target to-dos. We'll give it a display of flex. We'll give it a flex direction of column. We'll give it a gap of maybe 4 pixels, just like that. What we're also going to do is make sure that these sections have a bit of space. Currently, they're possibly a little bit close to one another. And so these sections are within main. So we can come up to main, look at the gap. Maybe I make that 14. And that just pushes that down a little bit. I might even make it 24 so we have a bit more space. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to snapshot the current HTML inside of this to-do section, and then we're going to amend another to-do onto it. So we'll say let current HTML equal to, we can target the to-dos list element and take the inner HTML. And now what we can do is we can say let new HTML equal to, this is going to be a template literal string, and in this particular instance we're actually going to define it. So we're going to give this a class, so we're going to define a div, give it a class equal to to-do item. As such, that will allow us to style it. We can open that up onto a new line. We can actually put all of this onto a new line. So let's just do it like this so it's consistent. Inside here we can have the title of the item, so that is going to be perhaps an H2 tag, a paragraph tag. So a paragraph is the most common form of text tag. Inside of here, we can use JavaScript to add the to-do item. And actually, even in front of that, what we could do is we could have the list item. So we can take the index plus 1, because the first index is 0. Then we can have a bullet point or a period, and then we can have the actual to-do itself. So that is super neat. Now we have to close that paragraph tag because they all need a close. And then what we can do is at the end have a second div, and this div is going to have a class equal to actions, because this is where we'll have our delete and edit functions, I guess. So the first one is going to be an icon. We're just going to take it from here. We'll close that. We'll say delete. That's going to give us some trash. So let's say we take this trash icon. We can paste that in there. The second one we're going to take is a pen, and that's going to be for editing. So if we take this pen just here, we can paste that in there. So now we have these two items. They're inside of actions. So What we want is to execute this function on page load. So if we just call render to-dos, so now that's going to happen when we load the page. Obviously we have no to-dos, so nothing happens, but if I add in here, go to the supermarket, now refresh that and render this page, still nothing happens. And that's because we've only defined this HTML. We now have to finally define let amended HTML equal to the current HTML. And then we want to add on the new HTML. So that's the new total HTML. And then we're just going to say to-dos list.inner HTML is equal to the amended HTML. So now once again, I run that and we can see that we have our to-do item showing up on the screen. So that is super cool. Obviously the formatting isn't correct, so we can change that. So we can target this class, which is to-do item. We can just come up here and say dot to-do item because it's a class, we use the period to select it. We're going to give it a display of flex. The natural orientation is row. We're going to select the paragraph inside it. So to-do item and the paragraph within the to-do item. That's going to have a flex of 1, so everything else gets pushed to the far end. We're going to say align items center so that everything is perfectly centered vertically. We're going to now target the to-do item div, which is what contains these, the division that contains those icons. We're going to give this a display of flex and align items of center and a gap of maybe 4 pixels just to spread them out a little bit. Did I put them inside a div? I totally did. We actually named it actions, so we could just straight up target actions instead. And let's see if I make this 10 pixels, does that spread them out? It does spread them out. So we could say 14 pixels. So now we have that. We have our 2 icons at the end. We can say dot actions hover. So we can set a hover state for them. We could say color is maybe coral. So when you hover over them, they turn coral. You can see that. Obviously, we don't want both of them to be turning coral, and we actually need to target the icon within it. So now it's independent. We get that coral color. And what we can also do is give these a cursor pointer because they're going to be doing something. So now we hover over that, we hover over that, we get the different functionalities. So we can go ahead and remove this to-dos here. That section is just going to autofill with whatever we have. Now what we're going to do is make this add functionality work. So the next function we're going to define, and we're actually going to do this above, is going to be add to-do. And that is going to open up. And to do that, what we're going to have to do is select. So I might just move all of these definition ones to the top, or the element selection. So we'll say const to do input is equal to document.getElementById. And now we want to target the input text. So the input text has an ID, a unique ID equal to that. And so we can get the input value, as I will show you in just a second. The other element we're going to have to target is this one just here. So we're going to say const input button is equal to document.getElementById. We'll give this an ID equal to add, just like that. We can select add. And so for our add to do function, what we're going to do is we're going to take the current value of to do input. And so what we could do to demonstrate how this works is we could actually just console.log to do input, and we can actually just see what happens. So I could just, that's currently not going to do anything because we have to actually assign this function to a particular thing. So we're just going to say input button.add event listener. So an event listener listens for events. So the first argument to this function call is a click. That is the type of event. The second thing is the action to happen on the click. So we're going to set it to add to do. So on input button, when it gets clicked, we call add to do. So we should expect to console the to do input when we click the add button. You can see that currently that is not working, and that's because buttons have a default input type. So what we want to do is just prevent that from happening. So we're going to say e.prevent default. The default is to refresh the page, which is super annoying. So now when we click it, we still get a page refresh. And so we can just change that by making it a type of input so it gets confused. So now when I click that, we can see that it doesn't do anything. All it does is console this value just here. So this is the actual element. What we can do to level it up is we can target the value parameter inside it. And so now what it will do is console.log the internal state. So you can see that the value parameter holds the internal state of this. We also notice that the button is overflowing here. So what we're going to do to prevent this overflow is we're actually going to change the style of this. We're going to give it a position of absolute. So relative is the standard positioning. Absolute is slightly different. It's basically an overlay to the nearest relative parent. So we want to make sure that this parent has a position of relative because that is the parent. And what we're going to do is, now that it's absolutely positioned, you give it positional arguments. So we're going to say right is equal to 0. That will move it to the right. And we're also going to say top equal to 0. And we'll say the height is equal to 100% of the parent element. So now we can see that when I inspect this, that it no longer overflows, and it will just sit in that far corner and take up 100% height. And this will then just go behind it. So that's absolutely fine. What we might actually just do is, instead of setting the background to transparent, we'll set it to the actual background color of the page so that we can't see the text behind it, so that it's not just transparent. So in here, what we can do is we can just set it to that. So now if we have a whole lot of text in here, it's all hidden, we can access the console and we can access that value in our JavaScript, which means we can then add it to to-dos. So we can say to-dos.push text value, and we can say let text value equal to to-do input, which is the element and the value inside. So now we can remove that console. And so now what we would expect to have is the value added to to-dos. However, what's happening is it's not re-rendering to-dos. Every time we push to-dos, not only do we have to render to-dos on page load, but we have to say render to-dos and call that again. So now we add a value, we get more and more and more. We can see that what it's currently doing is it's adding the entire thing and then adding more and more and more. So that is just extra complicated. So basically what's happening is it's just adding more and more without ever resetting it. So what we're going to need to do is make sure that when we add, it doesn't redo everything. We just want to push to to-dos and then reset it. So what we might just do is target the to-do list and say inner HTML is equal to an empty state. So we'll completely reset it, and then we can add one, we can add another one, and then we can add another one. So we just get them all showing up on our page, which is cool. And we've got the little numbers there, so that's neat. Have heaps of them. So that is brilliant. The next thing we're going to do is just quickly change the footer because that looks lame. Here what we're going to do is just have a, let's say, an YouTube link. So we're just going to come in here and type YouTube. Get that little YouTube link, paste that in the footer. We're going to quickly just style that. So we'll just say footer. We'll give that a display of grid. We'll say place items center. So that will just center everything. So now we have a little YouTube icon, and then we can just target footer and the icon within. We can say cursor is equal to pointer. And we can also give it a hover state. So we'll just say footer icon hover. So when we hover over it, we just want the color to be cyan. So now when we hover, we can see it turns cyan. So that's super neat. The last thing we're going to do is actually just convert this into an anchor tag. So an anchor tag allows you to link things either internally or externally. This is going to be an external link, so we have to provide it an href. We're just going to say https://youtube/smalljames. That's my own YouTube. We're going to pass a second attribute, and we're just going to say target is equal to _blank. That just means open in a new tab. And so now when we hover over it, it's just going to open up youtube.com/smalljames. So let's try that again. Comes up with my YouTube, which is super neat. We're going to have to quickly remove some of the default styling for the anchor tag. So footer, anchor, we're just going to say color is inherit. So that should just be white. And now when it's hovered, because the default color for a clicked anchor tag is blue. So that's our little footer all done. Now we just have to make sure that these icons are functional. So the first one is going to be the delete. So here we can just add a new function similar to add to do. What we're going to do is say function remove to do. Once again, we'll just do it as we have there. Because this one's not a button, we don't have to worry about the e.prevent default. And so for this to-do, what we're actually going to have to do is receive the index of the to-do that we want to remove. So the way that we're going to do that is by adding a onClick handler to this icon. So that's just going to be onClick is equal to, and we're going to pass in the function name. So that is just going to be remove to do, and we're going to pass in the index. So the index is going to be the element I, so just like that. So now when we click on each of them, it will call that function, pass in the index, and then we can just remove it. So what we can do for that is we can just say to-dos is equal to to-dos.filter. We can take the to-do, we can get the current index. Well, actually, we don't want to double up, we'll give them separate labels. And now we just want to say return I is equal to index. So if the index of the current element is equal to the index of the item we want to remove, we're going to return false, and we're going to return true otherwise. So what that should do is that should remove that element. That's not working just yet. Let's try adding another one. We can see that it actually does work. The problem is that it only works when we re-render all of our elements. So what we'll do is we'll just copy this section here, set the to-do list empty, and then re-render everything. So now when I delete that, it's gone. When I come in here, we can add that. We can add it a bunch of times. We can delete number 3. We can delete number that. Let's say we have a slightly different one. We can see that this one is different. If I move it, it deletes that element. One thing I've noticed is that when we add, we want to reset this input, so we can just quickly do that. We can target the input. Once we've re-rendered the elements, we can say .value is equal to an empty string. So now I add it, it gets emptied. We have that. We can delete an element. The last thing we want to do is we want to edit an element. Now this is a little bit complicated, but the way that we're going to do it is we're going to use a combination of the add and the remove. So what we're going to do is we're going to say function edit to do will once again take an index, and we're going to say to-do list dot value is equal to the current value of the element at that index. So what we can do is we can target this element, and the way that we can do that is by saying to-do list. So we're going to say const car element is equal to document, and instead of this time using document.getElementById, we're going to say query selector, and now we can use CSS selectors to select the element that we're looking for. So we're going to want to target the to-dos list, just as we up here. So it's actually just known as to-dos. For the query selector, we have to select the type of element we're selecting by. So this is the pound for the ID. And then what we want to do is, since this has a whole lot of elements within it, we want to then select the paragraph, which is going to have the text. So we want to select the div, which is the nth child, and we want to pass in the index. So this is actually going to have to be a template literal string because it's going to be dynamic. So we want nth child, we will pass in the index plus 1. So if the nth child is the first child or the second child, because it's a 0th indexing system, we have to add 1. And then we're going to, inside that, target the paragraph, and then take the inner text. So this is a different value. We should be able to console.log current element, and I might just say current element text. Let's see if we can get that to work. So we're going to have to assign that to this icon click. So we'll say on click is equal to edit to do, and pass in, just as we have before, a template literal string, and give it the index. So here we have our two icons. If I click that, current element is not defined, so that didn't work. And I am a massive muppet. Some of you may have noticed that I updated this name, but I didn't update that name. So let's see if we can just go back to what we originally had and select that text. So cannot read the values of null. So that's good. Let's just try adding 1 there. At least now it's finding it. And just look at that. We have the actual text. So that is phenomenal. What we're going to do now is we're just going to splice the text. So we're going to say const spliced text, because we have to get rid of the first 3 characters. So what we're going to say is equal to current element text.slice. We'll take it from 2 onwards. So now if we console.log spliced text, we would expect to see it just go to the supermarket. So I think we might actually be able to take the space as well. So that will be the 3rd element. And now it's just go to the supermarket. And so what we can do now is we can say remove to do at that index. So that will remove the to do at that index. And then we can set the value of this input equal to that. So we can say to do input dot value is equal to spliced text. So what that's going to allow the user to do is to edit in here and then add it back. So I could add another one. I could add another one, go to the park, for example. Beautiful. Go swimming. And now if I want to edit it, it's coming back up here. I can change it and then go to the gym, add that back, and now we have our to-do list. And this whole page is entirely responsive. It looks absolutely excellent. If we really wanted to take it to the next level, what we could do is just say, when we focus on this input, if we can find it, so on the form, if we focus within, so we can say enter to-do form, focus within, we can say border color is equal to cyan. So now when we focus on the border color, we can see that it goes a brighter color. So that's pretty neat. We can set the default to-dos to empty. So now we have an empty to-do list. And now we can come in here and say learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Add that to the list. Then learn React. Add that to the list, and so on and so forth. And just like that, you have a fully functional to-do list. We have a little anchor tag. All of it's working. It's super interactive. The plus button actually wasn't necessary. I was intending to make that the add to-do list. However, what we could do to make it more interesting is we could give this input, this section enter to do, if we can find it, enter to do right here, come up here, enter to do. We could give it a display of none, and that's going to hide the element. So now it's completely gone. Now what we could do is when we click the plus, we could make it so that that element comes into vision. So what we could say is const, we'll have to target this icon. So we'll say const, we'll give it an ID equal to show enter to do. So now we have that, we can target that element. Let show enter to do equal document.get element by ID, target that. We can add a function here that says show to do input. We can say show enter to do dot style dot display is equal to inline, which is the default, or we could say block, for example. Actually, why don't we just say flex? So what that will do is that will show the input to do, and now we can assign that to show enter to do. Sorry, that is actually meant to be, that is already on display. So what we're going to have to do is target that whole input section. So we can say const form is equal to document dot query selector, and we will target the form. There's only one form in here, so that should select the form for us. And now we can say the form.style.display is flex, so that will show the form for us, which is perfect. And the form actually has a display of flex, so that is all good. Oh no, even better, it looks like that's where the display is. So for enter to do, so we can instead just target enter to do and set that up here. So we can say const enter to do is equal to document.get element by ID, enter to do, and then all we have to do is not even worry about this. We can set enter to do dot display dot why don't we set it to block, and now on show enter to do, which is the plus button, we can say add event listener. We can listen to the click, and then when the click occurs, we can show the input to do. So if we refresh that page, we click the plus, I would have expected this to come up. What I might just do is console.log here, see if that's actually working. That's not coming up for whatever reason. Show enter to do, is that correct? That is working, show enter to do. So we target that item, we give it the event listener Oh, that's the wrong function name. So we have to copy that and paste that in there. So now when we refresh this page, we click plus, we can see that the to-do input shows up. We can add a to-do, and then what we could even do is when we add a to-do, we could copy this line and set it back to hidden. So this is not necessary, it's just another example of how you can kind of fiddle around with this. So now we want to add something, we can add it. That should have gone away, and that's because that is none, not hidden. So let's add that, we enter the to-do, and that goes away. We want to add another one, we add that. We want to add another one, we add that. We can remove this, and the only thing that we have to do is when we edit it, we'll also want to show this to-do again. So we'll remove the to-do, we'll show the to-do input, and then it will all work. So now we add one, go to the gym, we click add, we want to edit it, comes back up here, the input shows up again, and we add it again, we add a new one. This is the second to-do. So the very last step is going to be hosting this project. We're just going to come over to Netlify. You'll want to make an account with them, super straightforward. It's all totally free. What we're going to do is we are going to click add a new site. We'll go deploy manually in here. And all you can do is come over to your folder and say reveal in the terminal or show in the file. And we can copy this and drag and drop it. So it has to be a file containing that. So we'll just copy the whole folder containing an index.html. It's going to upload it. And just like that, it's actually deployed. And now we have a link for our site. The link totally works. This is a completely live site. You could add a domain to this, you could send it to your friends, and you have a fully functional to-do list. Add that in, add another one, add that one in, delete the top one. Complete, beautiful CRUD app. Anyway, that's the whole tutorial. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like and sub. Stay tuned for the next videos, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Go to the gym. We could edit this one and say, and then go to the supermarket. Don't mind the spelling. And then we could delete the top one and so on and so forth. We have some functional links, anchor tags, all sorts of great stuff. And as I mentioned, the whole thing is very responsive and just looks super pretty. This project will be at the end deployed live. So this is a link that you can send to your family and friends. And that's pretty much it. It's the ultimate learn to code vanilla web development tutorial. So hope you enjoy. If you do, don't forget to like and sub, and let's get into it.